To dive right into the themes, then, let's begin with the chapter on economy, where he's starting off asking essentially the counterpart to Emerson's question of to what end is nature. Thoreau is asking to what end is life? Why are we here? What's our purpose here? How should we spend our time? What is it that we ought to be doing? And of course, like he said, lots of advice that people have to give you about life. I can tell you, they're telling you about it all through college, all through elementary school and high school, and everybody's got lots of advice to give you on how to live your life. And he says, I just wonder how much of that stuff is true. I'm using page numbers from the Princeton edition, so if you have that edition, you can follow along with me with my quotations here. He says on page 11 here, it would be to some advantage to live a primitive and frontier life, though in the midst of an outward civilization, if only to learn what are the gross necessaries of life and what methods have been taken to obtain them. He says, when one man has reduced a fact of the imagination to be a fact of his understanding, I foresee that all men will at length establish their lives on that basis. I want to learn, I want to experiment on my own to find out why life is what it is, why we're here. What am I supposed to be doing with myself? And he starts off the book basically saying, look, there's a big problem. Everybody has a problem right now in modern times, and that is that people are stinking miserable. Why? Look at page 6 where he says, to the reader, directly addressing the reader, some of you, we all know, are poor, find it hard to live, or sometimes, as it were, gasping for breath. I have no doubt that some of you who read this book are unable to pay for all the dinners which you have actually eaten, or for all the coats and shoes which are fast wearing or are already worn out, and have come to this page to spend borrowed or stolen time, robbing your creditors of an hour. It is very evident that what mean and sneaking lives many of you live, for my sight has been whetted by experience, always on the limits, trying to get into business and trying to get out of debt. A very ancient slough, called by the Latins ice ilium, another's brass, for some of their coins were made of brass, still living and dying and buried by this other's brass, always promising to pay tomorrow, and dying today insolvent, seeking to curry favor to get custom by how many modes, not only state prison offenses, lying, flattering, voting, contracting yourselves into a nutshell of civility, and dilating into an atmosphere of thin and vaporous generosity, that you may persuade your neighbor to let you make his shoes, or his hat, or his coat, or his carriage, or import his groceries for him, making yourselves sick, that you may lay up something against a sick day, something to be tucked away in an old chest, or in a stocking behind the plastering, or more safely in the brick bank, no matter where, no matter how much or how little. He says people are miserable because we're such slaves to money. That's the problem. That's what our biggest problem is. On page 7, he says, we don't even know why we work. He says, worst of all, we have a problem with slavery in this country, but the worst thing in the world is to make yourself a slave. Worst of all, when you are the slave driver of yourself. Talk of a divinity of man. Look at the teamster on the highway, wending to market by day or night. Does any divinity stir within him? So our problem is that we keep driving ourselves to make more, make more, make more. We compromise our principles. We suck up to other people. We practically sell our votes to politicians who promise us we'll get more by voting for them. We do everything a mean, sneaking, sniveling existence when we ought to be standing up straight, proud, independent people. Even guys who are truck drivers or hauling goods to market. Look at him. He looks horrible. He looks miserable. You know, he's work. Why do you work so hard? I got to save money. Why? Because I could get sick one day and old, and I might need the money. Well, you're making yourself sick and old doing this, pal. So he really is exploring this question of why are people doing what they're doing? Why are we miserable? Well, the reason he says we're miserable is because we don't understand what we're doing to ourselves. We're working ourselves to death, and we're worrying a lot about money. So he says, what I want to find out is, what is it that I absolutely have to have that's absolutely necessary just to sustain life? I don't want to know what people want to have. What do you have to live and get by? Then once I figure out what's the baseline, what does everybody have to live, what is the necessity of life, what are the necessities of life, then I'll go figure out how much of the other stuff I want to give and then what to do with the rest of my life. So if you look with me on page 12, he actually talks about this, and he says, here, by the words necessary of life, I mean whatever of all that man obtains by his own exertions has been from the first, or from long use, has become so important to human life that few, if any, whether from savageness or poverty or philosophy, ever attempted to live or do without it. What do I absolutely have to have? Well, he determines that there are four things: food, shelter, clothing, and fuel. Those are the biggies, right? No matter where you go, could be Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Europe, Australia. Everybody pretty much has to have those four things. Now, what he wants to know is, what is the absolute least amount of these four necessities that you have to be able to survive and live comfortably? Once I establish that, then I can figure out how much of the rest of the stuff I want to fill my life with. Okay? What's really revolutionary here, we'll talk about the Indian basket story here in a moment. What's really revolutionary here is he develops on page 31 a concept of, or a definition of, the term cost. Look at what he says there on 31. If it is asserted that civilization is a real advance in the condition of man, and I think that it is, right? He's not wanting to go back to a caveman existence. I think civilization is an advancement in the condition of man. I'm glad we have what we have today. And I think that it is. Though only the wise improve their advantages, it must be shown that it has produced better dwellings without making them more costly. And the cost of a thing is the amount of what I will call life, which is required to be exchanged for it immediately or in the long run. Now that is really fascinating. In fact, I think that's one of the greatest points in the entire book. He defines cost. What does a thing really, really cost? Well, you can do that in dollars, drachma, yen, euros, pounds, whatever. But the real cost of a thing is what it costs you. Not what it costs Bill Gates, but what does it cost you? And how much money is not the issue. How much of your life you have to give up to get the thing, that's the issue. Now, I know that people work for lots of reasons, and money's only one of them. One may be personal satisfaction, and I don't just show up to my job every day just for a paycheck. But, you know, and so it's not as though the time you spend at work is completely lost time. There are lots of things that we get from work other than money. But if you were to suppose for a moment that everything you bought didn't have a price tag in dollars, but had a price tag in minutes, hours, weeks, months, and years of life that you had to give up to get that thing, boy, I bet you'd really rethink what you decided was enough. So, for example, if you walk into the car dealership and there's a Bentley and they say, great, we'd love to sell you this Bentley. It's going to cost you 26 years of your life. So, you know, somehow we look in the magic ball here and we determine that you were going to die at age 86. Suddenly you can have the Bentley and you die at 60. Whoa. That makes the used Kia look a lot more attractive to me. I don't know about you. But when you put it in those terms, how much life do I have to give up to get the thing? That is a really big revolutionary kind of, you know, the scales fall away from your eyes and suddenly you see what the real cost of a thing is. And so what Thoreau is trying to do here is redefine economics on a personal basis, not on a macro basis, but on a micro basis, on a you basis. And the reason he says that so many people are miserable is because they keep giving up a lot of life to get stuff. We'll talk about the impact of that in just a moment. Another reason why they're so miserable is because they don't understand how to be happy and what happiness involves. Look at the Indian basket story, which is kind of a long story, and it doesn't really, unless you think about it really hard, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's the story of an Indian who lives in a village. This is on page 19, where he says, I walked into town and I saw these people selling things, and he says, I can sell things too. I know what I can do. I make baskets. And he makes good baskets. And he goes and he makes baskets, and he sits on the stump or wherever downtown, and nobody buys the baskets. And he gets really mad. And he says, he'd said to himself, I will go into business. I will weave baskets. It is a thing which I can do. Thinking that when he had made the baskets, he would have done his part, and then it would be the white man's to buy them. He had not discovered that it was necessary for him to make it worth the others' while to buy them. In other words, sometimes we just set about just doing what we know how to do, and we don't really relate what we do to other people. We don't bother to inform other people why what we're doing is of value. Hey, guess what he does for a living? Or at least wants to. He wants to be a writer. He wants to be a lecturer. He wants to be a philosopher. And if you're going to do that, you've got to convince people that what you have to say to them is worthwhile. Just because you publish a book, Week on the Concord and Merrimack River didn't sell more than about a couple hundred copies, you got to do more than just publish your ideas. You got to tell people why they should read what you have to offer. He says, I too had woven a kind of basket of a delicate texture, but I'd not made it worth anyone's while to buy them. Right? So my first book was a flop. Why? I didn't really go out and bother to tell people why my life experience was relevant. This time, I'm going to do that. With this book, I'm going to show you what I did, how I lived, and what I learned. And if you can get something out of it, God bless you. I hope you do. If you don't, well, I'm sorry, but I'm going to do my best to help that. Okay? On page 33, he gets into things about why we own what we own, or whether things own us, for example. He talks about earlier in the chapter the rich person who inherited money and how it's a terrible burden to inherit money, because now you have to figure out, what do I do with it all the time? You say, well, that'd be a nice problem to have. Not when you think about it. He's trying to look at the world through a different lens here. Things that you and I think, or conventional thinking puts forward as being good, he says is frequently bad. We just choose to ignore the downside of wealth. Wealth is a problem. Wealth can make us into slaves of stuff, and that's a big problem. On 33 he says, and when the farmer has got his house, he may not be the richer, but the poorer for it. And it be the house that has got him. Right? Do you own your stuff, or does your stuff own you? And he talks about debt and farms and debt and people in poverty and all these kinds of things. And he says, man, you know, are you living the way you're living because you're paying payments on everything? Hey, does this sound familiar or what? You know, look around you. Look at what's in your house, your apartment. Is this stuff that you actually have to have? What are you giving up to get this stuff? Are you giving up life, time, your health, your happiness? Are you working for some bank? Is half your paycheck going to pay interest on things that, when you think about it, you don't really need? He's asking, look at how relevant, how modern this chapter is. It's amazing, isn't it? So one of the things that he points out on page 16, for example, is once you have stuff, what good is it? Okay? Then what? What do I do with it? He says, I am talking not to people who are happy. He says, I don't mean to prescribe rules to strong and valiant natures who will mind their own affairs, whether in heaven or hell, and perchance build more magnificently and spend more lavishly than the richest. He says, I do not speak to those who are well employed in whatever circumstance, and they know whether they're well employed or not. Hey, look, if you're happy, if you like doing what you're doing, don't read this book. This is not for happy people. This is for people who, like me, were miserable, because I didn't know what to do with my life, and I'd listened to all these people to tell me what I should be doing with my life, and when I started doing it, I wasn't happy. This book is not for those, is for those types of people. He says, and they know, but mainly to the mass of men who are discontented and idly complaining of the hardness of their lot, or of the times when they might improve them. I also have in mind that seemingly wealthy, but most terribly impoverished class of all, who have accumulated dross, but know not how to use it, or get rid of it, and thus have forged their own golden or silver fetters. I'm talking to unhappy people. That's who I want to address here. The danger of stuff is that we never know how much is enough. We never really think about how much we're giving up to get it. We never think about the fact that it can own us rather than vice versa. But on page 37, he also explores this one other point, and that is, hey, the problem with stuff is that it creates this illusion that material things are permanent, and that's not true. Spiritual things are permanent. He says the effect of our art is merely to make this low state, right, our physical existence, more comfortable, and that higher state to be forgotten. He says the problem with stuff is that it distracts you. It makes you think of the here, the now, the physical world, life, rather than eternity, spiritual things, higher things. It can be a big distraction.